Alrighty, well, let's go. Hi everyone, my name is Brian. I work on the security team. I'm going to talk to you all about security for when writing gadgets and MediaWiki extensions. We're going to do this in a slightly old-fashioned way because I don't have a connector to my laptop for my presentation.
What do you need?
Thunderbolt to HDMI.
Maybe display the HDMI. Thunderbolt to HDMI and
Alrighty, cool.
Is there an Etherpad for the session?
I haven't set one up.
So you
I don't know. Well, I don't think. I'll see if the things. If not, we get to experiment with how good a presenter I am. Yeah, I don't. That's not.
Is it actual?
Yeah, no, I need an actual HDMI. No, this will be fun and exciting. How many presentations have you been to so far that have used a whiteboard? Alrighty. So yeah. In terms of security, like the first thing to talk about is like why do we care and what are we trying to do? So the main thing we're trying to, like, intuitively it kind of makes sense. We want to make sure it's not used improperly. When we're talking about gadgets, usually what we want is to make sure the gadget can't be used in a way other than what it's meant to be used, or can't be used to trick the user into doing something that they shouldn't be used, or it can't be used to take over another person's account. With extensions, we also want to make sure it can't be used to like take over the server or stuff like that. So in the gadget case, the most important thing, not important, the most prime thing to worry about is cross-site scripting, as that's usually in JavaScript code where the problem is. So usually this is one, a user input is put directly into the HTML without escaping it or anything. So for example, if you have something like is this actually readable or no? Okay, I don't have a darker color.
Is it red?
Is it red? Okay, that's better. Okay, so when you do document, like for example, you get an element, right? That should be lowercase. So like this is a common idiom for adding something to the page, right? You do document.getElement by ID for some ID, and then dot inner HTML. I don't know if that's capitalized. Plus equals, and then something like hi. Let's say that. So, for example, this would get some ID element, and then you'd add hi and the page name after it. This would be a security problem because the person could go to a page name with some sort of malicious characters in it, and then it might get interpreted weirdly. So in the page name case, it's not that much evil you could do because page names aren't allowed to contain less than sign or greater than signs. But you could, for example, if it had an and sign in it, like if it was add. How did people do this when I was like going to university? This is actually kind of hard. If it had something like that in it, that would get turned into an arrow, which is unlikely. The bigger thing is when you take a variable which isn't a page name that can't have that can have less than signs in it. So for example, if you're looking, say, at the URL arguments, document.location, you could insert it, and the user might have something like, if for example, had something like that, where it's taking something from the URL. The user might say, put it to a URL that's like mypage.com/script, and then do evil stuff, right? So yeah, so we want to prevent that. And the key way to prevent that is to make sure that we escape all user input. So there's a number of ways to do that. In MediaWiki, usually we do use the MediaWiki mw.html.escape. So that will replace all the less than signs with and less than LT semicolon entity reference. And that makes sure it's safe to put in the document so no HTML can be executed. This is really important because otherwise, for example, a different person could trick the victim into going to a web page with that in the URL, and then they could essentially totally take over the person's account, cause them to edit other things, or trick them into revealing their password or whatnot. Escaping is one method. An even better method, which doesn't always apply but can sometimes, is to use APIs that don't take HTML in the first place. So, for example, with jQuery, often you could kind of construct trees of HTML and then use the .text method where it doesn't take HTML at all. For example, so for example, something like this is very safe because it's creating a div and then it's putting this text in the middle of it. If you supply HTML to this text function, it doesn't execute it. So where possible, it's much better to do this method because it's much less hard to scrub. Like, it's basically impossible to mix up. With the other method, it's very easy to accidentally forget to escape something or do something, and then you're kind of screwed. So yeah. Does that make sense? Any questions? Let's see. So moving onwards, that's largely what you have to worry about with gadgets. With the MediaWiki extensions, there's a lot more you have to worry about. You still have to worry about this, but you also have to worry about Sql injections and other types of things. The key point is to more or less make sure you always use the appropriate escaping function, and then it's safe. So, on the PHP side, you usually use the HTML special character function to escape your HTML. Let's see. So, for example, or something you often see is if you have like, say, a parser tag, you might see something like Like that in your parser tag, which would be unsafe because this WF message function, when it's set to text, returns the text unescaped. And instead you would normally set text to escape to make sure that it's escaping the HTML or dash parse. Let's see. So, in terms of that, another common issue is cross-site request forgery when you're talking about PHP extensions. So, say you had an extension that has some sort of form on it, like it's a special page or whatnot. So normally you do the form and then you process the input, right? Generally you need to have a token there because other sites can also submit to your form. So in web browsers we have something called the same origin policy, which ensures that different websites can't read the content of other websites and other domains, which protects a lot of things, but it's sort of like a file permission where you have write and execute but not read. So they can execute scripts from other domains and they can they can send post or get messages to other domains. So if you have a special page and your special page in your extension takes some input, fills out a form or whatever, you need to ensure that other websites can't just post to that form and trick and pretend to be the user who's viewing it. So instead we add a little token that's an opaque value so that because the other websites can write to other domains but they can't read from it, so they won't know what the token is. So for example, say we have one website where we're like we send a message to make so say I should make this more specific. Okay. So if we have a page like this called make admin to say make someone an administrator, if all we do is take the username, then my other evil website could have a link to this page with this username and then either redirect users to it or trick the user into clicking on it. Then since that user is already logged in, the request will go through and it will act as if they did it even though they didn't realize it because they're on a totally separate domain. So instead, what we do is the form where in the correct usage of it has a hidden input tag named WP edit token. So all the forms on Wikimedia websites have this edit token flag. I'm sure if you've used the API, you've often had to fetch an edit token, and it can be frustrating when you're new to using the API to figure out how to fetch the token. So yeah, it's a token like this. The value is a randomly generated value, and the main property is that it changes all the time, and each user has a different one, so that nobody but you can know a token for yourself. So this gets submitted with the form, and then when it goes to the special make action, and then it includes a token. So now that it includes the token, the special page has to check that that token belongs to the current user logged in to ensure that It's not some other website trying to trick a user into going here when they didn't actually mean to. So it uses the user, so in a special page you'd use the $this, hit user, match as a token. And then when you call that, you check to see if the token matches, and if not, you give some sort of error, otherwise you continue with the request. This is actually a pretty common thing to overlook, and it could be a serious vulnerability, because like, you know, most administrators can be tricked into clicking on something. You like put a message on the talk page saying, hey, this vandal is saying mean things about me on this other website. Can you do something about it? And the administrator like has to investigate. They go to the other website, and if there's a CRSF vulnerability somewhere in that application, that other website could do things on behalf of the administrator's account without really the administrator realizing. But when we check that it token, that prevents it. Normally in your extension, oftentimes it's better to use APIs that take care of this thing for you. In MediaWiki, that would be the HTML form class, which allows you to specify a form, and as long as you specify it's a post method to use with the form, it will automatically do that it token for you. Yeah. So yeah, at this point, I was planning to kind of have my laptop so I could demo it, which would be much more interesting. But I did want to kind of ask people if they had any particular questions about how this stuff works, or anything they wanted to know in particular, or if they currently have an extension they're working on and they're unsure of something. No? Okay then. Well, at any case, feel free to interrupt me at any time if you do. So one of the other main sources of vulnerabilities is what's called an Sql injection, which is very similar to cross-site scripting, except it's with SQL. So, for example, a very common way to write SQL is to do something like, this is $dbr, which is the MediaWiki convention for our database objects. The query method, which just takes some SQL, for example. If you wanted to find the, say, edit count of a specific user, you might do something like this. Select edit count from user, where the username is equal to whatever the name supplied is, right? Sorry, I have to watch my quotes. So this might be, say you're working in an extension, it's like a parser function, and you want to be able to get the edit count of a specific user. So as the main part of your extension is probably querying SQL, and you might do the query, select user count from user edit count from user, where username equals $name, and maybe you get $name from like the user, right? From whoever is specified. So this would be an SQL injection, because you're just directly putting the name in the SQL. So for example, if someone asked on your wiki, so say it's a phrase or a function, so something like number edit count, the name, So say that's how the parser function works. That the user specifies something like that. So instead of doing a real username, they might do something like username equals some value, that's my username, and then an apostrophe to close the string, because this gets substituted into here. So if you add an apostrophe, that closes the string, and then you could add other things to the query. So for example, you might do into out file something like okay, so if you add something like this, you're now asking for that account of a user named Beowulf apostrophe into out file /var/www/index.php. So into out file is a feature of MySQL where you could take your query and put it into a file. So your SQL user would need file rights, which it should not have, but some people set up MySQL wrong. So in this case, to truly exploit you now created a file and you've overridden index.php. So you've now kind of totally destroyed the wiki. That's not the worst you could do though. You could also add something into out file using delimiter and then make your delimiter something like PHP, I don't know, eval, aggregate contents. Something like that to load, sorry, that's not written very well, but basically you could, as your delimiter, use a small PHP script to download a file off the internet and execute it. So from there, someone could totally take over your server. Or other things you can do, depending on how your server is configured, you might not be able to do that, but they might be able to get data out of the password table and find user passwords or whatever. So to prevent this, what we usually do is, again, we have to escape the input into the thing. So instead we use something like the add quotes method of iDatabase. And then that quotes the variable to escape all apostrophes or whatever. And then it's safe. Even better than doing that though is to use MediaWiki's select wrappers to make your query look like something like this, where you divide it up into all the components and then MediaWiki puts it together for you. So the first one is table, user, edit count, yeah, so when you use the select method, MediaWiki takes care of a lot of the escaping for you and it's easier to see at a glance that it's escaped properly. So this is a recommended way. And it has a weird order where the table comes first, then the fields, and then the where clause, where if you supply just a string, it will do it on escape. If it's an associative array, any of the non-numeric keys become equalities and it automatically escapes the value. So when you do that, you can easily see, other reviewers can easily see that escape properly, and it also is kind of more convenient to use. Yeah. Any questions about that? Let's see, what else can we talk about? It's just kind of towards what I wanted to talk about, towards the end of what I wanted to talk about. I don't know if anyone has any other questions to ask or anything like that.
What occurred to me, maybe JavaScript global variables. Are they to be trusted? I guess if the global context is compromised, then I'm screwed anyway, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you can, generally speaking, you can trust the global variables in JavaScript. If somebody is able to mess with them, they can almost certainly execute code and like all is lost. That said, you should trust the ones you know what they are. Like, if you don't recognize the variable, then like, you know, you don't know what it is. But it's not like old versions of PHP with registered globals. Cool. Anything else? Sorry, I don't think this was the most enthralling presentation with the whiteboard demo. Let's see what other things. On a similar note to this, if you're executing other files from PHP, like if you're shelling out, similarly there's WF escape shellarg to use to make sure your shell arguments are escaped and someone can't add something to the shell argument to execute arbitrary code. It's the general rule is if you're executing another language, you always have to escape what you're putting in there if it comes from the user. Cool.
Is there any resource to read up on this?
Yes, we do have a page on MediaWiki.org called Security for Developers, I think.
Yep.
Or manual : security for developers? Okay. And also, like, if you have concerns, we're an IRC and you can ask on the MediaWiki IRC channel and people should be able to help you. We're around and we're happy to help. Yeah. Ready? Yeah, okay, so I think I'm going to end the presentation there, and yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
And of course, if anyone has any questions later, please feel free, or anytime even after the conference, please feel free to reach out with email or find me in person or IRC, or our other two members of the security team, Sam and John over there. Yeah, we're here to help make sure MediaWiki's code base is secure, so anyone has any question about security, don't hesitate to ask, right? Yeah?
Is it possible for someone to submit some code to review to the security team?
Yeah, if you're not sure about us is something, yeah, you could tag us in and maybe have a look, as long as it's like MediaWiki related in
Yes,
some
yeah.
fashion. Yeah.
Right. Good to know.
Yeah, and if you ever see something that you think is a security vulnerability, you can email us at security@wikimedia.org. We always appreciate people who find vulnerabilities in MediaWiki code or extensions.